I see middle-aged guys looking at me strangely. And very often, they're like big, muscly middle-aged guys. And they're looking at me like they just would like to punch me because I look like a skinny queen, you know what I mean? But I know the scenario. And the scenario is Superman films were the first movie they were ever taken to. And they probably identified more with the supervillain than the Superman, if I'm feeling up to it. As they get close to me, I just say, "Kneel before Zod, you bastards," you know. And I get wonderful laugh. "Oh, it is him, it is Zod, you know, my God, it's really Zod, you know." Okay, everybody ready?
Yes.
Heading over? Okay.
When you think about your career, is there a period in particular or a project in particular that you think, wow, I really loved that time, or, you know, I really enjoyed filming that film?
Well, the first time I went to Hollywood, I was chosen by William Wyler. And I realized it was a masterwork. So I passed. I said, I can't do this. And the producers kept coming back to me. And I kept saying no. Then finally they called my agent and they said, "We've got William Wyler. Is Terence going to turn down William Wyler?" Now, William Wyler was the most successful director in the world. And I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll do the test with all the girls. So I'll show Wyler what I can do." So I tested with all the girls. And I had to go to the old Columbia building to meet him. Doors are opening and people are like looking at me. And then a door opens at the far end of the corridor. And this kind of diminutive guy comes walking towards me. And he gets really close to me. And he doesn't say anything. And I say, "Which girl do you like?" He says, "I haven't looked at the girls yet." "Do you want me for this?" I say, "But you know, in the book," he says, pulls my head close and he whispers to me, "I'm not going to make the book. I'm going to make a love story, modern." It never actually occurred to me just how poverty-stricken we were. It later emerged my mother was ashamed by our furnishings, or lack of them. She counteracted this by ensuring we were always spotless and as well turned out as possible. When my mother passed away and I was spurred to scribble an autobiography, some of the girls I had attended Plaistow Grammar School with contacted me. They all agreed they hadn't considered how hard up we were, as I was always so smart and clean. Growing up, I had little contact with the divine mind that was my father, as he was at sea stoking the coal fires that propelled the merchant ships in the Second World War. Whilst I was lucky enough to inherit Tom Stamp's bone structure, the earliest conscious male influence was from Gary Cooper. I saw my first movie when I was like 3.5 or 4 years old. And I saw the mesmerizing Gary Cooper in a film called Bourget. His presence had such a deep effect on me. I wanted to be like him. In other words, I wanted to be in the Foreign Legion and do the things that he did. But as I grew up, I realized that he wasn't a legionnaire. He was an actor. But the feeling that he'd imparted to me was still as real. I thought, well, that's what I want to do. I want to be like him. And I started commenting in front of the family, oh, that's crap, I could do better than that. I'm sure I could do better than that. My dad wore it for a bit. And then one evening he said, listen, son, people like us don't do things like that. And I went to object, and he said, son, I don't want you to talk about it anymore. So I thought, well, I can't go against my dad. He was a stoker, but he was an alpha male. So I thought, well, then I got to leave home. I knew I wouldn't have any money, so I had to find a drama school that gave a scholarship. So that's how I wound up at the Webber Douglas. And I went onto the little stage at the Webber Douglas Theatre, and I gave off this Romeo's Death speech, gave it my full, everything I had. And the principal, it was a guy called George Rossiter. He was a rather kind of precious middle-aged guy. And he came down the stairs and he came up to the front stage and he said, well, Mr. Stamp, that was very interesting. It was the first time I'd seen Romeo played as an East End barra boy. And I said, yeah, well, that's what I come here to learn, isn't it? And he said, indeed. But I did win the scholarship, which is the main thing. Yeah. And so when I was about 15, 16, I was given the part of a 65-year-old colonel. Apart from the fact that I couldn't really learn the lines. I stumbled on stage at the East Ham Town Hall, made up as an old man. Can you imagine? And not really knowing the lines. So that was
Old man.
that was like the stupidest thing I've ever done, you know. And it could very well have ended there, you know what I mean? Because I thought, maybe I'm not cut out for this, you know. But then I started seeing films by Marlon Brando and I thought, wow, he's doing what I feel, you know.
Yeah.
I have to give credit where it's due, and I have to give credit to the great Anthony Newley. I knew that he was from a very poor family, and he'd actually kind of made it. Not only had he made it, but he was a great performer. And the day that I was actually introduced to him, I was with Lionel Bart, and he played Lionel Bart the score of Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. And he sang to it as well, you know, and I was just standing there. And it wasn't until he'd finished the sort of the recital that he realized that there was another guy in the room. Realizing I had his full attention, I just remember saying, what to do? And he took the question and he said, if in doubt, do nothing. So in other words, in that moment, he gave me the essence of what made him a great performer. How often has one heard, oh, it's in the stars, or it is written? The fact is, one only knows by what happens as it happens. When I made the decision to follow my dream, it was the most difficult I had ever had to make, going against my father's belief and my mother's emotional wishes, considerable, to keep me at home. However, once I had actually cut loose, there was a big tidal change.
Sail 1 mile off the This is Terence Stamp, the young actor hailed by famed columnist Luella Parsons as the screen's outstanding new star discovery.
The interesting thing really for me about the movie was that Ustinov, after we'd been filming for like a week or so, he said, "I'd prefer if you didn't come to rushes. Actors can only look at themselves. And I'm worried that that would alter what you're doing. And I'm very happy with what you're doing. So don't come to rushes." So I didn't, because he was like...
Brilliant producer-director Peter Ustinov.
He was like a genius, you know, and he'd chosen me. So, of course, if he said something, I did it.
"You will come to attention when I address you."
Ustinov was like a genius. Weiler was like the most successful film director, critically and commercially. And then Fellini.
Like the beat, beat, beat of the tom-tom when the jungle shadows fall.
On the first day of working with Fellini, he just, you know, I was given my mark, this is the scene, and I wasn't getting any direction. So I caught his eye and I said, and he looked like, you know, you can. So he came over and he said, "¿Qué pasa?" Like, what's happening, you know? And I said, "Look, I'm a young English actor. It's my first day on a Fellini film. I want some direction." And he didn't pause. "Listen, last night you was at a party, but really was orgy. Loads of blondes with big breasts and lots of fucking. You fucking some big titted blonde, some big black man fucking you, and all night drinking and fucking. And then this morning somebody gives you big dose of LSD. Now you're here." I said, "Fine." The big change in my adult life was when I went to Rome to work with Fellini. Fellini was working on a kind of a work that was going to be his masterpiece. It was called The Voyage of Mastorna. And he was actually writing it with Marcello Mastroianni in mind. But he talked about it a lot to me. And consequently, I imagine, he must have been a bit nervous about it. So he consulted a woman who he knew this philosopher called Krishnamurti. And Fellini then said to her, "Is there anything I should know about him, you know?" And Vanda said, "Yes, he loves film." And when he met Krishnamurti, Krishnamurti came to his office. He showed Krishnamurti this little cut that he put together. But apparently, when he'd seen the little cut of the rushes, he said to Fellini, "I'd like to meet that boy." And that was how I came to have my first meeting with the great Krishnamurti. When the eagle flies, it leaves no mark. The observer is the observed. I never questioned Krishnamurti's authenticity, assumed it was my thickness that was the problem. You don't have to be Edison to switch on the electric light. "Listen," I said. He reaches out. His hand on my arm is warm and dry. Just be aware when you are unaware. What is of Krishnamurti? The what is when he paused, laid his hands on my arm, paused the thoughts in my brain, and allowed me a moment of silence. He made me aware, for the very first time, of the timeless movement of the alone, that which precedes thought, always there. He touched the depth of what Mr. Gary Cooper had initially ruffled. In the silence, in the emptiness, the moment of the alone. Then only journey of the unknowable. When you wake up in the morning, there's a feeling that you are. And that's what I think is the kind of mysterious but endlessly fascinating part of existence. It's like what is looking. So my take on that is I have to find the character within myself. And I may get clues by looking at people, or I may get clues by listening to music that somehow appeals to something in me. And then I have faith that between action and cut, that will manifest. When I got on the set of Billy Budd, there was a scene at the end of the shoot where the peace of mind and the innocence of Billy Budd transforms the mood of the men, because they can't bear to see this kind of innocent character hanged for something he couldn't possibly have done. And I didn't know how to do that, because I was still like a little bit of a method actor. I was thinking about emotional memory, and I couldn't really remember any time when I'd been at peace, you know. So on the day of the shoot, I hadn't come up with anything. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to do what Newley said. I'm going to have to do nothing. For a 21-year-old actor making his first movie, it was terrifying. And just before action, this little tune came into my head. And then intuitively I thought, wow, that's a song my gran used to sing in the kitchen. And I used to take my homework to her house because it was quiet. I just turned to face the men, just listening to the song. Little Dolly daydreams, pride of Idaho. Well, don't you know? Well, don't you care? And I just let the song play. And Ustinov said, okay, we got that. And I knew it was something new. I knew it was something that had never happened before.
And in the moment it happened. I'm curious how that informed how much you use technique and how much you allow that to happen.
Assuming it's not going to happen, I take care of the craft. And all the great actors, Paul Scofield, Wilfrid Lawson, I only ask the greatest actors, what do you do?
Yeah.
And they all say, learn the words. They don't lengthen that. They don't give any explanation. They just say, learn the words. So I realize that in learning the words is some secret. In learning the words, something's revealed to you. Everything that I can prepare to do, I do. And then I always empty myself in case there's this spontaneous movement. It's the breath that gives the body its life. And it's only when the breath leaves the body that the body dies. So really, you could say, if the creative artist takes the breath as the vehicle, not just the body, then as the attention to the breath deepens, the magnetism in the breath reaches into parts that it's never normally reached into. I'd applied my new life to my performing skills, all the things I'd learned in the East about breathing and yoga and exercise. I was always thinking, you know, when the call comes, I will no longer be driving a Mini, I'll be driving an Aston Martin, you know, so that's how I looked at it. So there was no question of me not doing it. There was a real feeling that this had come for me. can't think of a comic book movie since the first two that have been as good. And even if they were, the Superman movies were the first two. So not only was it Superman 1 and 2, but it was with Marlon Brando, who was my absolute top idol, living idol. So when I finished The Mind of Mr. Soames, which was 1969, I didn't really get another major role until 77, which was when the first two Superman films came up. I had tried to be positive about the lull in my career, and I kind of rationalised that by saying Humphrey Bogart didn't make it till he was 42, Jack Nicholson didn't get a break till he was after 30, but Cary Grant, who was one of my idols, had had a lull in the middle of his career. That's what's happening to me. The 8 years of layoff had kind of filled me with a kind of energy that was just waiting to be released. And that all went into General Zod, you know. My experience of seeing Gary Cooper as a Legionnaire, their first experience was seeing the Superman movies. And the guy they graduated to was Zod. I expect to be forgotten. I expect to be forgotten. I mean, kids today don't know who Gary Cooper is, you know. Most of them don't know who Laurence Olivier is, you know. They certainly don't know who Rudolph Valentino was, or John Barrymore. So it's the nature of things. It was just that I was in the moment when I was in front of the camera. You know, there's lots of kind of people who will tell you that, you know, we are all connected and that all is one. And I never really understood that, and consequently never contributed to it. But as I'm kind of much nearer the end of my life than I am at the beginning, I can honestly say that I think that the very best of us, that which is looking, consciousness itself, I don't think that's separate. What can I tell you that I haven't already told you? Do I get depressed? Lonely? Of course. It's not my job to be different, only to see things differently. When I was approached to scribble this tome, the initial thinking was a way of conveying to young folks driven to an artistic existence what I had learned from artists finer than myself. What can I tell you that I haven't already told you? I remember I had lunch. I was invited to a lunch when I was living in the Albany. It was the Queen Mother's like 80th birthday or something. And I went and I was introduced to the Queen Mother. And she said to me, "Oh, and you're an actor, and what would I have seen that you've done?" And I thought to myself, not much really. So I said to her, "Have you got a TV?" And she said, "Yes, but I prefer to go to the cinema. I like it when the lights go down." And I thought, yeah, that's what I like about it. When you give over your individuality and you're just looking, you're just there.
you.